Hello, my name is David Remsen from the GBIF Secretariat, and today we're going to demonstrate the use of the Darwin Core Archive Assistant, a tool to assist in the publication of biodiversity data using Darwin Core Archives. Darwin Core Archive is a biodiversity informatics data standard that makes use of the Darwin Core terms to produce a single self-contained dataset for species occurrence or species checklist data. It's a set of text files with a simple XML descriptor file called Metadata.xml that informs others how your files are organized. The Darwin Core Archive Assistant is an online service that allows you to build this XML file simply by selecting options from a pick list and filling in a few fields regarding your data. It enables you to create and publish Darwin Core Archives without installing any dedicated software on your own servers. Before we begin, I'd like to show you a folder containing two data files representing a simple species checklist database that I maintain. I created these files by exporting the data I wish to share into simple tab-separated files. The first file, called taxon.txt, contains a simple list of species and their classification. The second file, called vernaculars.txt, contains a set of common names for those species. I will use the Darwin Core Archive Assistant to create the XML meta file that describes these data files. Moving over to my browser, this is how the service looks like when it loads. On the left-hand side is a panel that displays a list of folders organized into documents. These folders represent the core and the extension data types that can be published as Darwin Core Archives. Darwin Core Archives can be used to publish species data such as checklists using the taxon core type, or they can be used to publish primary biodiversity data such as natural history specimen data using the occurrences core type. These core types are complemented by a series of extensions that support the publication of extended data types to the core according to the Darwin Core Archive format. Let's go ahead and open the taxon folder to take a look at what's inside. When I open the folder, it displays a list of Darwin Core terms that support the publication of species data. As I move the cursor over the terms, you will see a description and some example values are displayed. What I'll do next is I'll go ahead and I'm going to select from this list the terms that match the data fields I exported in my species list. I exported fields that match the Darwin Core terms of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and I will follow the recommendations and I'll use the scientific name term for matching the species information. Note that I selected each term from the listing. They appear over here on the right-hand panel. This panel displays a series of tabs, some of which will represent the core and the extension types that I've selected. Each of these panels displays the set of data elements I selected to describe my data. Here, the taxon panel now displays the data fields I selected to match the columns in the data file. The listing displays 8 columns, starting with column 0. By default, this column will hold the required ID field. An identifier is required for any Darwin Core archive that is composed of more than one file. And I showed you initially that we have 2 files, taxon.txt and vernaculars.txt. The required field by default occupies column 0, but it, as well as any field element, can be easily reordered simply by dragging and dropping into a new position, like this. And so the intention is to make sure that the order that's in this window matches the order of the columns in your data file. Next, I will add the name of my data file to this file name element located at the top of the taxon panel. Recall that I named my file taxon.txt. After that, we need to provide the physical file settings for this file. This includes things like the field delimiter, whether or not my data file includes column names in the first row of data, things like that. The assistant provides some common settings as pre-configured options, or I can customize as needed. Each field provides a drop-down list of options for me. I save my data file as a standard UTF tab-separated file, and this pre-configured option is already preset for me. Now let's just take a look at the XML that's been composed so far. The meta.xml tab stores the current XML, By reading it, you can see where it has composed the XML data that corresponds to the settings we have made using the assistant. For example, here are the 7 columns that we selected from the left-hand panel, redisplayed as XML. Let's go back to the left-hand panel now. We're going to close this taxon folder, and we'll go ahead and describe our vernacular names file. The vernacular names data is best described using the vernacular names extension. When I open that folder, I can see the set of terms available for sharing information about common names. In my database, I store the English name of the species and the countries where this name is used. Now note that by default, I must have a taxon ID and I must have a vernacular name in my data file in order to even use this extension. And these values are added as column definitions automatically. Now I'll go ahead and add the country code element by selecting it. So at this point, I've mapped 3 fields in my data file. I mentioned that my species only include English vernacular names, but it may be that some users of my data may not recognize this. Now there is a language element over here, and it's part of the extension, but I don't store any language information in my database. It might be useful for some users, however, that I let them know that these are English language terms that are coming from my data set. The Darwin Core Archive format allows me to create global variables in the meta file to do exactly that. And here's how I do it. I'm going to select the language element, and it will automatically move to my list on the right, as if I'm adding another column. Notice, in fact, that it even sets it to column 3, as if I have a 4th column in my data file. Now what I'll do is I'll click over here into the default value section, and I'll type in the value that I wish this element to contain, which is English. Next, I will tab over to this global column here, which presents me with a checkbox, which I'm going to just check off. Now, when I click outside the field, it'll finish it up, and notice that now there is no column number associated with this element. What I've done is I've created a global value which is English, and I've mapped it to the language element. And this information is stored in the XML meta file, which I'll show you in just a moment. What I've done is I've added information to the profile. It's information that's not stored in my database, but it will be useful to users of my data. So let's just wrap it up here by adding the file name, vernaculars.txt, which is representing my common names file. And just go and set the physical settings, which are just a tab-separated file. All of these things were already in place, just like I did before. Now we'll take a look at the resultant XML. You'll notice that there are new additions to the file from when we just looked at it a moment ago. And these match the new entries for the extension. And you'll even see there's an extension element here. And if you look at just the last section here, here is my default value, the global value, which is English being matched to the language term. And this XML all conforms perfectly fine to the schema. Now, before we finish up, I'd like to add one more file to my archive. When I exported my data files initially, I also created a simple metadata document that describes my checklist and provides some basic contact information in case anyone wants to write me about my list. And GBIF provides tools for creating these kind of metadata, and I saved this file on my desktop and called it checklist.xml. Here it is right here. Now I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'll drag this file and just drop it into my folder, okay, right there. And then now it's in the folder with the rest of my data files. Then I'll return back to my Darwin Core Archive Assistant, and in the metadata.xml tab here, I will fill in this field for storing the metadata file, and I'll type in the name, which is checklist.xml. So now I've essentially finished up what I've needed to do in order to create this XML file. Then I can either save it with the Save button, or I could just copy it, go to a text editor, create a new document, and paste the information in here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to save this file as meta.xml, and I'm going to save it in the same folder with the rest of my data files. Okay? I'm going to close that up. So let's take a quick look at the files that I've finally got into my archive. I've got my initial 2 data files, taxon.txt and vernaculars.txt. Here's my metadata document that describes the checklist and provides contact information about me. And here is this meta.xml file that we created, which serves as a map to all these data files. So I'll go ahead now and zip this file to create my archive. Here I'm compressing it. And there is the zip file. That's my single self-contained data set. I can mail this to a colleague, or I can post this on a web server and share the URL. That's how simple it can be to publish species data or primary biodiversity data to the GBIF network. This completes this demonstration of the Darwin Core Archive Assistant. Please, if you have any questions, contact our help desk. It's helpdesk@gbif.org if you have any comments or any questions. Thank you very much.